My name is Daniel Park.
For the past 12 years, Novatech Industries was more than just my job. It was my second home, my proudest achievement, and in many ways, my life's work. I wasn't some flashy executive or social media darling. I was the lead systems architect, the guy who worked behind the scenes, building the core framework of our flagship AI control module, the very heart of our robotic automation line. My patent, registered quietly under my name during a joint venture with the company, powered over 70% of our revenue-generating systems. I never cared much for titles or the spotlight. I wore the same black hoodie most days, took my coffee without sugar, and treated the janitor the same as I would the CEO. I wasn't trying to climb the corporate ladder. I was too busy keeping the ladder from collapsing.
But things changed the moment Evelyn Crane walked in.
She was young, mid-30s at most, with sharp heels, sharper cheekbones, and a glare that could turn boiling coffee to ice. A Harvard MBA with a background in corporate restructuring, she was brought in as the new division director after our previous VP retired quietly. The board introduced her like she was a blessing wrapped in expensive perfume and a PowerPoint deck. I remember our first meeting. She scanned the room like she owned it, pausing on me just long enough to frown. "You must be the engineer," she said, flipping through her iPad. "Daniel, is it?" "Architect," I corrected, offering my hand. "Systems architect." She shook it like it offended her. That should have been my first clue. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Evelyn launched meetings at odd hours, tore apart long-established workflows, and used words like synergy and optimization so often they lost all meaning. But what rattled me most was how she never asked, only ordered. She cut funding to R&D by 30% without consulting anyone. My team? Cut in half. I tried to offer insight. I showed her data, performance metrics, project timelines, risk assessments. She brushed me off every time with a thin smile and a rehearsed phrase, "Thanks, Daniel. I'll take it from here."
What I didn't know was she had already targeted me for removal.
I wasn't part of her vision. I didn't fit the lean, glossy rebranding she was planning. I wasn't loud on LinkedIn. I wasn't a thought leader. I was just the guy in the corner office who quietly held up the entire infrastructure.
Then came the final blow, an HR meeting with no warning.
"We're restructuring," Evelyn said coldly, sitting across from me with folded arms and a smug look. "Your position has been made redundant." I blinked. Redundant? Evelyn, I created the architecture you're... "Obstacles like you don't belong in a listed company," she interrupted. "It's not personal. It's strategic." She slid a folder across the table. Severance papers. I stared at her, stunned. She didn't know. She had no idea.
She had just fired the man who held the patent that kept Novatech alive. And I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet.
The moment I stepped out of that HR office, folder in hand, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was numb, walking through the halls of Novatech like a ghost. People I had mentored for years avoided my eyes. A few offered awkward nods like they already knew. Word travels fast when a new boss wants to make a name for herself. I was just her sacrificial lamb, an easy way to show the board she was cleaning house. Back in my apartment, I dropped the folder on the table and sat in silence. No TV, no music. Just the sound of city traffic humming outside my window. I kept replaying her words in my head. Obstacles like you don't belong in a listed company.
It was laughable.
Evelyn thought she had power because she had a title. She thought I was just another name on a spreadsheet. What she didn't realize, what no one at the company knew, was that Novatech's entire robotics division still ran on my code, tied to a patent I owned independently. During the early days, when Novatech was just a scrappy startup with barely any funding, I had negotiated ownership of the system's core algorithm. It was a risky move. They couldn't afford to pay me what I was worth, so I offered them a license instead. Exclusive use, as long as I was employed. The minute I wasn't, they'd have to renegotiate or shut everything down. The clause sat quietly in a dusty legal file. No one had ever questioned it. In fact, most of the current executives had no idea it even existed. Only the original founder, Mark Tobias, had signed off on it. But Mark had retired 2 years ago and moved to Switzerland. Evelyn? She never read the old contracts. She was too busy modernizing.
But now I had a decision to make.
I could walk away. Let them crumble slowly under their own arrogance and inefficiency. Or I could make them feel what it's like to rip someone out of their life's work without knowing what they just triggered.
And there was another layer.
My former team, some of the brightest engineers I'd ever worked with, were struggling under Evelyn's regime. Overworked, undervalued, silenced. I had mentored those kids, watched them grow from interns to innovators, and now they were suffering because one woman's ego demanded total control.
The more I thought about it, the more the numbness burned into resolve. She fired the wrong person. She wanted to play power games? Fine. I'd show her what real power looked like. The next morning, I got up early. Not out of habit, out of purpose. I shaved, dressed in a crisp navy blazer I hadn't worn in years, and opened a private file on my laptop titled License Termination Protocol. It was one of those files you never think you'll need. But I had built it with the same precision and care I applied to everything else, just in case Novatech ever forgot that the quiet engineer in the back room was also the reason they had a functioning robotics division. At 9 a.m. sharp, I emailed a formal license termination notice to Novatech's legal department. Subject: Termination of Patent License Agreement, Notice of Revocation. I attached all supporting documentation, my patent registration, the original licensing contract signed by Mark Tobias, and the clause stating that the agreement was contingent on my employment status. I made it very clear that as of 9:01 a.m., the company was no longer legally permitted to use or distribute any product based on my technology. 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing non-stop. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Legal, HR, operations. Even the CTO, Gregory Hines, a man who once called my work unsexy but essential, was trying to schedule an urgent chat. I ignored every message. Instead, I paid a visit to someone who could help stir the pot, Samira Lane, a tech journalist I'd known for years. Samira met me at a small cafe downtown, notepad in hand, eyes gleaming like she already smelled blood in the water. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that Novatech's entire robotics platform, Automata-Os, was built off your patented system?" I nodded. "And as of this morning, they no longer have the right to use it." "Jesus," she whispered. "Do they know what that means?" "They will when their customers start calling." Samira didn't need more. She was already drafting headlines in her head. We spoke for an hour, and by the time I left, she promised me the article would be live by evening. I walked through the city with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was defending my legacy. There's a difference. By 6 p.m., the storm had begun. Novatech's internal systems began malfunctioning, automated test lines grinding to a halt, diagnostic dashboards going dark. Their tech support team, unaware of the legal issue, began pushing patches that did nothing. By 7 o'clock, clients began flooding their helpline. And at 7:42 p.m., the article dropped. Novatech faces major legal crisis after firing inventor of core robotics system. Samira Lane, TechScope News. The article was brutal and thorough. It featured excerpts from the license agreement, an overview of the patent, and a not-so-flattering profile of Evelyn Crane, painting her as the arrogant executive who didn't do her homework before pulling the trigger. Social media lit up. Tech analysts speculated on the company's survival. Investors panicked. And Evelyn? She called me at 8:14 p.m. I let it ring. Then again at 8:16. And 8:17. On the fourth try, I picked up. "Daniel," she said, breathless, "we need to talk."
I could hear the tension in her voice, the thinly veiled panic she was struggling to contain. Gone was the sharp-tongued executive who called me an obstacle. Now she sounded like someone realizing the ice beneath her stilettos had just cracked.
"There's nothing to discuss," I said calmly. This is a misunderstanding. You didn't explain any of this when we—"
You fired me, Evelyn. You didn't give me a chance to explain anything. You made a decision. Now you're seeing the consequences.
There was silence on the other end. "Then, Daniel, listen, we're willing to renegotiate the license. Our legal team is preparing." No. No?
I'm not interested in renegotiation. You didn't value me as an employee. You won't buy me off now. The patent stays with me. Novatech needs to find another solution. Her voice hardened. Do you realize what you're doing? You're destroying the company.
I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I'm just reclaiming what's mine." She hung up.
Over the next few days, things spiraled. Stock prices plummeted. Clients pulled contracts. The board called an emergency meeting. Evelyn's name started trending for all the wrong reasons.
Then the twist.
On Friday afternoon, I received a call from Mark Tobias, the retired founder.
"Daniel," he said warmly, "you made the news."
Not how I expected to, I chuckled.
"I should have warned them. Evelyn was hired for her connections, not her judgment. I'm proud of what you did, and I have a proposal." That caught my attention.
I've been watching Novatech fall apart under people who don't understand what we built. If you're interested, the board's ready to remove Evelyn and reinstate someone who actually knows the tech.
"You want me back?" "I want you at the helm. CTO. Or higher." I didn't answer right away.
I stared out the window of my apartment, the city buzzing below me. The company that threw me away now wanted me to save it. The same executives who once saw me as a background player were now desperate for me to take center stage.
I didn't want revenge, but I did want change.
And if I had to step into the light to protect the work I'd built and the people who still believed in me, maybe it was time. 2 days after my conversation with Mark Tobias, I stood in the same glass-paneled boardroom where I'd been fired just a week earlier.
But this time I wasn't called in as a subordinate. This time I walked in as the man they needed to survive.
12 board members sat around a long, polished table, their faces a mixture of concern, shame, and exhaustion. At the far end sat Evelyn Crane, still clinging to her composure, though the dark rings under her eyes betrayed how little sleep she'd had. The room was silent as I entered. Every eye turned to me. Mark Tobias, joining remotely via video call, gave me a nod.
"Daniel," said Joseph Kwan, the acting board chair, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us."
I took my seat, folded my hands calmly on the table. "I'm not here to save Novatech," I said flatly. "Let's make that clear." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn didn't blink. "I'm here for the engineers who stayed late every night trying to make miracles happen with half the budget. I'm here for the clients who trusted the systems I built. I'm here to make sure the people who understand this company, the ones who built it, are never treated like garbage again." Mark smiled faintly through the screen. Evelyn, however, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Park," she said tightly, "what you've done has severely damaged Novatech's reputation. Clients are leaving. We've lost 3 major contracts in 2 days. Your refusal to negotiate—"
I cut her off.
"My refusal?" I raised an eyebrow. "You called me an obstacle and fired me without reading the contracts that govern your own product line. You didn't ask a single question before cutting off the man who literally built the foundation of your operations. You didn't just fire me, Evelyn. You fired the code."
Her jaw clenched.
"Let me explain how this is going to go," I continued. "I'll agree to relicense the patent, but under new terms."
Joseph leaned forward. "We're listening."
1.
I began, holding up a finger. Evelyn Crane is removed immediately as division director, not reassigned. Removed. A murmur swept the room. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. 2. My original team is reinstated with full back pay and guaranteed budget autonomy for the next 2 fiscal years. Daniel, Evelyn started, but this time Joseph raised a hand to silence her. 3. The company formally acknowledges its dependency on my system and restructures its governance policy to ensure no single executive can make unilateral termination decisions in technical departments. I paused. And I don't want the CTO title. More confusion. I want Chief Innovation Officer. And I want a seat on this board that got their full attention. Mark, still calm, spoke first. That's quite a list. It's not a negotiation, I replied. It's a rescue mission, and that's my price. Joseph sighed. We need a few minutes. The board filed out into an adjoining room, leaving just Evelyn and me. She stood, arms crossed, fury in her eyes. You think you've won something? No, I said. I didn't do this to win. I did this because you forgot the most important rule in leadership. Never assume the quiet ones are powerless. You humiliated me, she hissed. You humiliated yourself. All I did was turn on the lights. She looked like she wanted to lash out, but instead she turned and walked away, heels clicking on the tile like a drumbeat of retreat. 10 minutes later, the board returned. Joseph didn't sit. He looked directly at me. We accept your terms. And just like that, everything changed. Within 48 hours, Evelyn was officially terminated. Her departure was labeled as a strategic leadership change, but everyone knew the truth. The company issued a public statement acknowledging its dependency on third-party intellectual property and pledged to create stronger protections for its developers. Internally, I was met with applause when I returned. My team, what was left of it, gathered around me like soldiers welcoming back their captain. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others just looked relieved. Welcome home, boss, said Alicia, my former project lead, with a smirk. Miss us? Desperately, I grinned. But the moment I truly felt the weight of everything came a few days later, when I stepped into the empty lab where I used to work alone at night. The lights flickered on. The walls were lined with old prototypes and scribbled whiteboards. My desk was just how I left it, neatly organized, no personal decorations, just blueprints and circuit diagrams. I sat down slowly. For a while, I didn't do anything. I just sat there and let it all wash over me. The betrayal, the humiliation, the vindication. I had lost my job, my pride, and nearly my purpose. And yet, here I was. Not just back, but stronger. I looked at the blank sheet of paper on my desk and wrote one sentence. Never let anyone make you feel replaceable in a world you helped build. 3 months later, Novatech looked nothing like the company Evelyn Crane tried to mold. Gone were the hollow, motivational posters and stiff suits. The sterile walls had been replaced with sketches, prototypes, and vibrant discussion spaces. Innovation was no longer a buzzword in a quarterly presentation. It was the pulse of the company. And at the center of it all, I sat at a table surrounded by the same people who had once watched me pack up my office in silence. Alicia, our lead systems integrator, was briefing the group on a new client from South Korea interested in our modular AI chips. Her voice was steady, confident. Across from her, Ravi was laughing with 2 interns, kids I'd hired as a favor to a community college professor I respected. The energy in the room was real now, not manufactured. I leaned back and just watched for a while, let it all sink in. My new office was smaller than the old executive suite they'd offered me. I declined the luxury.
I didn't need a panoramic view of the skyline or imported leather chairs. I wanted proximity to the people building the future. My people. Funny how everything Evelyn tried to destroy had only made this stronger. She'd landed a consulting gig in another city, still clinging to her resume and buzzwords. I didn't care. I wasn't looking back anymore. What surprised me the most was how many messages I'd gotten since the article went viral. Developers, engineers, even former managers who had experienced something similar. They thanked me not because I embarrassed Novatech, but because I stood up for the ones who never get credit. One message, though, hit harder than the rest. It came from Mark Tobias. Daniel, I watched your interview last night. You didn't take credit for the rescue. You talked about the team, the culture, the future. That's leadership. If you ever want to build something new from scratch, give me a call. I've got a few ideas, and I know a good partner when I see one. Mark, I kept that email starred at the top of my inbox, a quiet reminder that the people who matter recognize substance over noise. A few days later, during a quarterly town hall, I stood before the full staff for the first time. No PowerPoint, no flashy slogans, just me and a handheld mic. 3 months ago, I said, I was escorted out of this building with a severance folder in my hand. I've been labeled redundant by someone who never took 5 minutes to understand what we actually do here. A few heads nodded. The room was silent. But I didn't come back to get even. I came back because I believe in this place, in all of you. And I wasn't going to let one bad decision destroy what so many of us spent years building. I paused, letting that hang in the air. This company didn't survive because of one person. It survived because when someone tried to cut out its heart, the rest of the body fought back. Applause started slowly, then built. Not the fake, polite kind. The kind that felt like solidarity, unity. After the meeting, I stayed behind to talk to people. One by one, they came up to thank me, not for saving the company, but for proving that value isn't measured by job titles or how loudly you speak in meetings. Later that evening, I walked the floor as teams wrapped up their shifts. I stopped by one of the test bays where a new prototype was being calibrated. Alicia was hunched over a console, muttering about a voltage error. "Need a hand?" I asked. She smiled without looking up. "You still remember how to fix low-current power drain?" "Try me." We worked quietly like old times. No ego, just mind-solving problems together. When it powered on, she turned and bumped her shoulder into mine playfully. "I had your back." "Glad I never really left," I said. We both knew what I meant. My name was never in the headlines, and I'd never been part of the corporate clique. But my work was always there, quiet, resilient, essential. And now so was I. That night, I took the long way home. Walked past the old cafes where I used to sketch designs on napkins. Past a bookstore where I'd first read about machine learning in a dusty corner with broken lights. Past a park bench where I'd once called my mom to tell her I got the Novatech job. Life has a way of circling back when you stay true to what matters. Not revenge, not pride, but purpose. My journey taught me something I'd never read in a business book or heard in a boardroom. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest voice. It's the one who built the floor they're all standing on. And when that person finally speaks, everyone listens.
My name is Daniel Rhodes. For nearly 3 decades, I was the first to clock in and the last to leave at Renwick Industrial Solutions. People used to joke that I came with the building. I joined at 22, fresh out of trade school, eager to prove that loyalty and hard work could still mean something in this world. Back then, Renwick was just a mid-sized manufacturing company trying to stay afloat in a competitive market. I started in maintenance, fixing busted motors and tracking down electrical faults with nothing more than a wrench, a multimeter, and a stubborn belief that everything broken could be fixed if you just kept at it. I worked my way up, not by kissing anyone's boots, but by showing up every day and doing my job better than anyone else. I became the facilities manager after 14 years, responsible for everything that kept the place running. The machines, the power systems, even the emergency protocols. I trained new hires, managed repairs, and made sure Renwick never once had to shut down due to internal error. I was the guy they called at 2 a.m. when something exploded or shut down without warning. I didn't mind the hours. I didn't mind missing holidays, anniversaries, even my son's graduation. I told myself it would all be worth it in the end. The pension, the benefits, the security. That was the promise they gave us loyal ones. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive a Mercedes like some of the execs or eat lunch at steakhouses during work hours. My shirts had grease stains, and I wore steel-toed boots till the soles wore thin. But I took pride in my work. I kept the lights on, literally, and people respected that. Or so I thought. I had just turned 51 when they told me. 3 days before my 30th work anniversary. 3 days before my retirement benefits and lifetime health insurance were scheduled to activate. Company restructuring, said Mr. Andrew Voss, the new CEO. He was maybe 35, fresh from some Ivy League school, with perfect teeth and the kind of handshake that felt like a limp fish. You understand how business works, he said with a smile I'll never forget. Smug, rehearsed, the kind you give someone right before you stab them in the back and ask them to thank you for it. He handed me the termination papers like it was nothing. No farewell party, no handshake from HR, no gold watch or framed certificate. Just a printed severance check, a generic thank you for your service, and an empty cardboard box for my things. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't even blink. I signed the papers, gathered my tools, and walked out the front door for the last time. But as I drove home, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have, one thought kept burning in my mind like a fuse waiting to ignite. You don't get to erase 30 years with a smile and a pen. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and made one single phone call. When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, took a deep breath, and waited. By morning, Andrew Voss would collapse to the floor, and nothing in his world would ever be the same again. I didn't call a hitman or anything like that, in case you're wondering. I'm not a criminal. I've spent my whole life believing in structure, in rules. But there's a difference between following rules and letting people walk all over you. The call I made was to someone I hadn't spoken to in 18 years, Thomas Grant. Once upon a time, we were best friends. Then business got between us. Back in 2007, Tom and I pitched an efficiency system to Renwick. A smart grid system that would save them thousands annually in energy and maintenance costs. I had the blueprint. He had the software. They passed. We were nobodies, they said. Not the kind of minds you invest in. 6 months later, Renwick implemented a suspiciously similar system, but under someone else's name. Voss's uncle, to be exact. We lost everything, and we never spoke again. But Tom hadn't forgotten. Neither had I. I'd followed his career from a distance. He'd made a name for himself after Renwick, quietly, under different company names, all while collecting evidence of corporate theft, data manipulation, and patent infringement. Turns out, Renwick had a long history of exploiting their lower employees. I wasn't the only one tossed aside right before their benefits kicked in. And now Andrew Voss, smiling, perfect-suited Andrew, was carrying on the family legacy. The call that night was short. "You're sure you want to do this?" Tom asked. I gave them 29 years, I said. They gave me a box. A pause. Then, "All right. I'll send you a file tomorrow. You forward it to the right people, and we'll watch them burn." When I woke up the next morning, I found an encrypted folder in my inbox. Inside, a decade's worth of internal emails, financial reports, and most damning of all, evidence of fraudulent safety inspections signed by Voss himself. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. But here's the thing about corporate corruption. It's never enough to have the truth. You have to know where to drop it so it explodes. I didn't send it to the police. Not yet. Instead, I sent a copy to someone else. Someone who'd been trying to get inside Renwick for years. Her name was Naomi Park, an investigative journalist who ran a niche but respected watchdog site that specialized in white-collar crime. She'd contacted me once, years ago, about workplace treatment at Renwick. Back then, I was too scared to talk. Not this time. I included a short note. You once asked about Renwick. I'm ready to talk. Daniel Rhodes. Within an hour, she replied. Mr. Rhodes, you just gave me the story of the year. Let's meet. Tonight. And that's when the real unraveling began. We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the coffee flows like water. Naomi Park was sharper than I remembered. She wore a plain jacket and no makeup, her recorder already on the table before I slid into the booth. You look like hell, she said, without even a smirk. Yeah, well, I replied, corporate loyalty doesn't age like wine. She tapped the recorder. Tell me everything. For the next 2 hours, I spilled it all. Names, dates, cover-ups, the fraudulent safety inspections, the real reason the old warehouse fire was never investigated, the pattern of layoffs just before retirement thresholds. I even had old logbooks and security clearance records I kept out of habit, thinking they'd someday make a good memoir. Turns out, they'd make something much more valuable. Evidence. When I finally leaned back, exhausted, Naomi didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the notes she jotted in tight, perfect handwriting. This is systemic, she finally said. You're telling me they've been shaving off benefits from employees for over a decade, just to keep the bottom line clean. Yeah, I said. And Voss, he's not just continuing it. He's accelerating it. She looked up. If even half of this holds up, Daniel, this could shut them down. I nodded. That's the plan. She paused the recorder. Are you ready for what happens next? I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, I wasn't. Not entirely. I was still adjusting to the reality that my career had ended with a manila envelope and a forced smile. But something deeper than fear had taken hold. A quiet rage, the kind that didn't burn hot, but cold and precise. I was ready enough. The first story dropped a week later. Re-NWICK Industrial FAC is ACCUSATIONS of FRAUD. Employee ABUSC screamed the headline across every newsfeed I scrolled through. Naomi had done her job well, backed every claim with records, quotes, scanned documents. She even published excerpts of Voss's emails, where he joked about trimming the old fat before pension season. My phone didn't stop ringing. Old coworkers, former supervisors, even a few of the execs who had avoided me in the break room now wanted to talk. Some were furious, others grateful. Most were stunned. But not all the reactions were positive. 2 days after the story broke, a black SUV parked across the street from my house. A man in a suit watched my door from the driver's seat. He didn't get out. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what he was there for. A warning. They wanted me to know they were watching. The next day, I found my mailbox torn open and emptied. The morning after, a dead crow was left on my porch. Classic intimidation tactics. I called Naomi. They're trying to scare me. Are you scared? She asked. No, I replied. But I am pissed. That's when she told me about the whistleblower protections being arranged. Lawsuits were forming. A class action suit already had 14 plaintiffs, and government agencies were requesting interviews. She had my back. So did a growing number of former Renwick employees who were finally speaking out. People who, like me, had stayed silent too long. Meanwhile, Voss wasn't going down quietly. He did what snakes like him always do. Held a press conference, blamed disgruntled ex-employees, and promised an internal audit. He smiled through it all, as if the walls weren't caving in behind him. But Naomi wasn't finished. The second article landed harder than the first. This time, she published a full expose on the warehouse fire from 2013, complete with fire marshal records, falsified reports, and a confidential witness statement that placed the blame directly on neglected maintenance protocols. And that's when it happened. The board suspended Voss pending investigation. Internal documents began leaking from panicked executives trying to cover themselves. Stock prices tanked. Investors began to bail. And me? I watched it unfold from my modest living room, drinking black coffee and flipping channels between news coverage, court hearings, and shareholder panic. But victory didn't feel like I thought it would. The man who'd sat across from me at the termination table, grinning like a wolf, was now splashed across every business news segment. Words like fraud, lawsuit, and criminal negligence followed his name like a funeral procession. And still, it didn't bring me peace. Not yet. One night, 2 weeks into the fallout, my son Marcus came by. He worked construction now. Rough hands, sunburnt skin, honest work. We hadn't always been close. I missed a lot of his milestones chasing job deadlines and emergency calls. He stood in my kitchen, watching me stir soup on the stove. "I saw the news," he said. I nodded. "You really did it, huh?" His voice wasn't judgmental, just uncertain. "I didn't plan it," I said. "But when they pushed me out, I couldn't let them get away with it." He walked over, grabbed a spoon, and tasted the soup. "Still too much salt," he muttered. Then, after a pause, "I'm proud of you, Dad." I stopped stirring. "I mean it," he continued. "You got dealt a dirty hand, but you didn't fold. You played it better than anyone else could have." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing people like Marcus that you don't have to accept injustice quietly. That when the system fails you, you don't have to fail yourself. You fight back. You stand up, even if your knees shake. Even if it takes 29 years and one final betrayal to light the fire. It should have ended with Voss getting suspended. That's what I thought. But like any cornered predator, he came out swinging. A week after the second expose dropped, my lawyer called me in a panic. "They're filing a defamation lawsuit against you," she said. "Voss's legal team is claiming the files you shared were stolen company property. They're also alleging you falsified evidence." I didn't say anything at first. I just let it settle like a weight in my chest. After all this, after telling the truth, after risking everything, they were flipping the story. "It's meant to scare you," she said. "To discredit you and stall the investigation. Don't panic." But I did panic. Quietly. I hadn't just sent Naomi those files. I kept backups. One on an old USB. One printed, stored in a sealed envelope in a safety deposit box under my wife's name. But I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected Voss to risk even more exposure just to silence me. That same day, a news segment ran claiming I had a personal vendetta against the company. They dragged up an old HR dispute from 2004 where I filed a complaint about unpaid overtime. The story painted me as bitter, unstable, and potentially vengeful. For the first time since all this began, I felt the tide pulling against me. Marcus called that night. "You okay?" he asked. "They're trying to make me look like some lunatic with an axe to grind." I said. "Are they succeeding?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe." There was a long pause on the line. Then he said something that hit me harder than any headline. You taught me to tell the truth, even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything. So tell me, was it the truth, Dad? Yes. Then screw them. Keep going. I hung up with my jaw clenched tight. The anger was back, not wild, but focused. And I realized I had something Voss didn't. Something none of his smug lawyers or polished PR consultants could fabricate. People. The very ones he discarded like trash were now willing to stand beside me. The next day, I called Naomi. I want to go public, I told her. You already are, she replied, sounding confused. No, I mean me, on camera, my face, my voice, the whole thing. I want them to know I'm not hiding. She was quiet for a moment. That would be a big risk, she said. They'll dissect your life. They already have. Let's give them something worth dissecting. 3 days later, we aired a live interview on Naomi's channel. It wasn't flashy. No makeup, no background music. Just me, sitting in a folding chair in front of a plain backdrop, telling the truth. I told the world how I dedicated my life to Renwick. How I believed in hard work and loyalty. How I was discarded days before my benefits kicked in, like yesterday's garbage. I showed documents, emails, maintenance records with falsified signatures. I named names, carefully, truthfully. And I looked straight into the camera and said, I didn't come forward to destroy a company. I came forward because I refused to die with the truth locked in my throat. It went viral in under 12 hours. Thousands of comments poured in. Former employees, people from other companies, retirees, whistleblowers, people who had been silenced and sidelined, flooded the comments section with their own stories. I wasn't just a man with a grudge anymore. I was a symbol of something bigger. Voss tried to counter it, of course. His legal team scrambled. But the more they fought, the more people saw the truth. By the end of that week, a congressional inquiry was opened into Renwick's labor practices. Voss was subpoenaed, and one by one, board members began resigning. The house of cards was collapsing. And then, the unexpected happened. One morning, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. Not a court summons. A real, paper letter, handwritten. It was from Margaret Ellis, the widow of one of the warehouse fire victims from 2013. Her husband, Reggie, had been a forklift operator. Died of smoke inhalation because the fire alarm system failed during a night shift. The letter was short, but every word felt like it carved itself into my ribs. They told me my husband was careless, that he didn't follow procedure. I lived with that shame for 10 years, but your story changed that. You gave him back his dignity. Thank you. I sat there, holding that letter, and I cried for the first time since I walked out of Renwick. Because this was it, the heart of everything. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration, dignity, truth, and reclaiming the stories of people who never got to tell theirs. 2 weeks later, the defamation case against me was dropped. Turns out, Naomi's research team had uncovered even more damning internal memos during discovery. Memos that showed the company knew about the safety violations, knew about the manipulation, and more importantly, knew about me. How long they'd planned to fire me just before the retirement milestone. The tide didn't just turn. It became a flood. 6 months later, I stood outside Renwick's old headquarters. The building was empty now, gutted from the inside, with 4 SALD signs sagging in cracked windows. What used to be a hive of industry, humming with machines and morning chatter, was now nothing more than a hollow shell. The lawsuits had multiplied. Voss was indicted on several counts, including corporate fraud, destruction of evidence, and endangering employees. He pled not guilty, of course, but his bail hearing didn't go his way. Last I heard, he was under house arrest in his mansion, watching everything he built fall apart on cable news. Renwick Industrial Solutions filed for bankruptcy 2 months ago. Their assets were being liquidated to pay out settlements. And I wasn't rich. I didn't want to be. The class action payout wasn't massive, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was an admission of wrongdoing. I gave a chunk of it to Reggie's widow, Margaret Ellis. She cried on the phone when I told her. Said she hadn't expected anything more than a thank you. I told her Reggie deserved better. They all did. Marcus came by one weekend in early spring. We were planting flowers in the backyard, something I never thought I'd find peace in. But there's something healing about dirt under your nails when your soul's been scraped raw. He looked at me and said, "So what now, Dad?" It was a good question. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He chuckled. "That sounds like one of those cryptic old man answers." "Probably is," I smiled. But the truth was, I had ideas. For the first time in decades, I had time. Time to spend with the people I used to miss. Time to think. To write. To teach, maybe. A local community college had reached out after seeing the interview. They wanted me to speak about ethics in industry. Imagine that. A grease-stained lifer talking to future CEOs about right and wrong. And then there was Naomi. She'd gone national. Her series on Renwick had won a journalism award. She invited me to the ceremony, but I politely declined. That was her fight, and she deserved the spotlight. I'd had enough of that. But she did send me a framed headline. The first one. The one that started it all. Fired days before retirement. One man's story brings down a giant. I hung it in my garage, not to gloat, but to remember. To remind myself that the truth isn't always quiet. Sometimes it roars. People often ask me if I regret staying at Renwick so long. If I'd go back and change anything. I think about that a lot. There's a version of me, young, hopeful, still believing that hard work always pays off, who would have said yes. Who might have chased a different job, started a business, maybe even traveled. But now? No, I don't regret it. Because if I hadn't stayed, I wouldn't have seen how deep the rot went. I wouldn't have known what they did to people like me, and like Reggie. I wouldn't have exposed them. And more than anything, I wouldn't have found my voice. You go through life thinking being quiet makes you strong. That loyalty is the same as dignity. That you take what's given and keep your head down. But sometimes dignity is leaving the job you gave your life to, head held high, and saying, "You don't get to erase me." That's the thing no one tells you. You don't just work a job works you. And if you let it, it'll carve pieces from your soul until there's nothing left but a shell and a uniform. But if you fight, if you speak, if you refuse to be forgotten, you get to take those pieces back. I still wake up early, out of habit. Still make black coffee. Still tie my boots before stepping outside, even if it's just to feed the dog or rake leaves. But now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone different. Not bitter, not broken. Just a man who got tired of being quiet and decided to make a little noise.